concept of interviewing covers a lot of ground, from informal interviews, unstructured interviews, semi-structured interviews to structured interviews. So interviews really exist on a continuum depending on the degree of control we want to exercise on our respondents' responses. So different types of interviews would yield different types of data which could be useful for different types of research. So you will not learn how to interview by just listening to me lecture about interviewing, but hopefully through the techniques and the concepts covered in this lesson, you will be well on your way to becoming an effective interviewer. So let's talk about the different types of interviews. So at the one end of the continuum, we have informal interviewing. And informal interviewing is characterized by a total lack of structure. So it basically consists on trying to remember conversations heard during the day in the field. So it basically consists on unburdening your memory and developing field notes. So although we refer to this type of interviewing as informal, informal does not equate to lightweight. Indeed, it is hard work. So this type of interviewing can be very useful to uncover new topics of interest that might have been otherwise overlooked. Okay, so next comes unstructured interviewing. So with this kind of interview, you basically sit down and hold a conversation with another person. So the whole idea is to let your respondents express themselves in their own terms and at their own pace. So this kind of interviewing works well if you have plenty of time, especially if you can interview your respondents on many separate occasions. So it is very useful in ethnographic research, and indeed we'll be spending the rest of this lesson focusing more on unstructured interviews. So when you cannot interview people on many separate occasions, semi-structured interviews are your best bet. So this kind of interviews are basically done with the aid of an interview guide. So a list of questions and topics to be covered during the interview. Semi-structured interviews work well with people who make an efficient use of their time, such as bureaucrats or the elite of a community. So you come prepared with your list of questions and you make sure you don't waste their time. So with this type of interviewing, the interviewer is fully in charge. So you know exactly what you want to get out of the interview. However, you still leave a little bit of room to follow new leads. So on the other end of the continuum, we have structured interviewing. So structured interviewing are basically like a questionnaire which is administered orally. So you ask your respondents nearly identical questions. So it is basically like, if the respondent answers this way, then you can ask them this particular question, or you move on to the next question. So they are very structured, and most of the time, their results are quantified. So you can basically try to compare how your different respondents responded to different questions and kind of compare them, quantify them. In this lesson, we'll be mostly focusing on unstructured interviews. So structured and semi-structured interviews can be useful in ethnographies. However, unstructured interviews tend to be your best bet. So semi-structured and structured interviews, because of the way they are formulated and the questions, and this very rigorous plan you tend to follow, they can sometimes sound somewhat unnatural. So we won't cover semi-structured and structured interviews in this lesson, but unstructured interviews. The etiquette for conducting an interview. So before the interview itself, arrange for the interview at your informant's convenience. So it doesn't have to be at your convenience, but at their convenience. You're the one who needs something from them. So arrange the interview at your informant's convenience. So agree on a quiet place. Avoid places with ambient noise. So places like cafes where you can be interrupted or disrupted by the other people present in the room are probably not convenient. So arrive on time and be prepared. So don't show up late at your own interview, if you're the one conducting the interview especially. So dress appropriately for the setting and for your informant. Again, important. So depending on the way you dress can heavily influence your interview. So people can either take you seriously, or if you overdressed, they may, be reluctant to open up because they may feel threatened and not safe. That also happens. So don't try to squeeze too much into a short time. So don't try to cover too much if you don't have really the time. So before you start the interview, assure anonymity and confidentiality. So tell your informants that I won't be asking for your names will not be used. Or if you already know their names, you can also assure them that you'll be using a pseudonym instead of their real name. So briefly explain your research and what you need from them. So try to explain your research, especially in plain language, in a language that the informant can understand. So I know sometimes when we get specialized on our little topic, we tend to use, this kind of specialized language that other people may not understand. But if you're explaining your research to other people, make sure they can understand what you're saying. So explain that their participation is crucial. So tell them that your participation is vital. I really need your input because of this, because of that. All right, so encourage them to interrupt you. So you never know when you might be taking over the interview and talking too much. So always encourage your participants, your respondents to interrupt you. Ask for permission to record or to take notes. So that again is important. Don't just start taking notes or recording them without actually telling them. So just tell them this interview will be recorded if you don't mind. And this is how I'm planning to use the tapes or the videos. And when you finish, so thank your informant and follow up with a thank you note or a thank you email. And if appropriate, a token of gratitude. So don't forget that. That's a crucial aspect, especially if you would need your respondents in the future. So thank them, send them an email, a thank you email, a thank you note. It's important. So try to follow these guidelines as you prepare to go for an interview and as you set up for the interview. Okay, now asking questions. So earlier we've talked about different types of questions. So we've talked about closed questions and open questions. And these two types of questions would yield different types of data. So they can both be useful in interviews. So with closed questions, they can be effective in gathering background information on your respondents. So questions like, do you have any siblings? Do you own a car? How many years of schooling have you had? So because closed questions tend to produce single phrases or very short answers, it is a good idea to always know when to navigate to open questions. So open questions are very useful, and they are the kinds of questions you need to be asking more your respondents in unstructured interviews because they will give more data. So they're the types of questions that are formulated like, tell me more about the time when you did this. So describe the first time you did this. Tell me the story behind something, okay? So always prepare your open-ended questions, and I also encourage you to do some background research to be able to ask good open-ended questions, good questions in general. Okay, so besides asking questions, learning to listen is another key aspect to interviewing. And it's one of these aspects that most people tend to forget or not focus on. So what you have to do is showing signs of good listenership when you are interviewing somebody. You ask them questions, but show them that you are genuinely interested in what they have to say. And you have to do this with both your body language and your verbal responses. So good interviewers wouldn't allow their eyes to wander as the respondents is providing responses. So you wouldn't be checking your phones or your watch. So especially with this new generation, this is very crucial. Don't be interviewing somebody and you're always on your phone. So if you do that to me, I would find that very disrespectful, and I wouldn't be willing to share anything with you, really, because that's a waste of my time and a sign that you are not interested in what I have to say. So you have to learn to effectively probe your respondents with verbal and non-verbal responses, and also learn to ask good follow-up questions. So that is what shows that you're a good listener. So with unstructured interviews, the key is really to get your respondents on a topic and get out of the way. So that's really crucial. So let them provide you with information that they think is crucial, that they think is important, not that you think is important. So especially if you want to discover their worldview, if you want to discover their perspectives, it is important to get out of the way, to let them express themselves the way they want. So something else we'll be talking a little bit more about with unstructured interviews is learning to probe effectively. So probing is nothing other than learning to elicit more information from your respondents without getting too much in the way. So I have been interviewed by people who try to push their own answers on me, and I could feel it because they really wanted me to say something which I didn't think was true. So I would respond that like a particular way, and the interviewer would keep pushing me in another direction and telling me, don't you think this is true? And I'm like, no, I don't think that's the case. You're misunderstanding me. And over again, the person had to ask that question multiple times. So when it's like that, the interview you'll be producing will only be a reflection of yourself, of your own ideas, not of the ideas of your respondents. So be careful. Try to keep that balance. Let your respondents express themselves. Let them tell you what is important to them, and don't try to push your own ideas on them. Crucial. You can always probe your respondents to produce more responses by using a variety of probing techniques. So let me talk about a few of them here. So you have what we call the silent probe. So the silent probe is nothing other than learning to be comfortable with silence. So somebody is providing you with the responses, they're answering your questions, and there is that moment of silence. So don't jump in, you just keep silent and let them continue. So this can be particularly effective if somebody is in like deep thoughts and they're just thinking carefully about something. So you have to learn to be comfortable with silence at times. It is only when you feel like, okay, the person is done responding, that you can actually break that silence. Otherwise, keep silent and let them continue. So this is one way of probing your respondents to produce more answers. So another type of probing technique is called the echo probe. So the echo probe basically consists on repeating the last thing somebody said and then asking them to continue. So this kind of probing can be effective when an informant is describing a process or an event. So you just repeat the last thing they said and you ask them to continue. So that's another way you can probe your respondents. Then there is the probe that you can also use. So you can always encourage your informants to keep talking, especially when they're telling you a story. You don't need like to interrupt them. So you can just use these short phrases. We also call them back channels to encourage them to continue. So the use of back channels are often a sign of good listenership. So we did talk about being a good listener. So somebody could be talking and you're just like, okay, right, great, exactly, that's what I was going to say, and why exactly did I do that? Right. So that's one way you can actually probe your respondents to produce more answers, is showing that you're carefully following what they have to say and that you're paying attention to what they're saying. So this can also be an effective way of probing your respondents. So another technique which is commonly used by researchers is a tell me more. So somebody describes something or answers a question and then you just ask them, could you tell me more about that? Or what exactly did you mean by that? So it's directly asking your informants to expand on something they had previously said. So this can also be another effective probing technique. Another probing technique is the phase assertion probe or the bait probe. So this is when you act like you already know something and then you say it to your respondents in order for them to open up more. So journalists are very familiar with this technique. So sometimes the respondents will correct you if they feel like you got it wrong, and this can be very effective. So you feel like, okay, somebody has not said something, but kind of claim that they have said it in order to push them to actually say it. So this can be an effective probing technique that you can also consider using. So as I just explained, the key is really to use a variety of probing techniques. So you may not be aware of how exactly you're probing people naturally. So what I would encourage you to do is try to pay attention to where you probe, even your friends in a conversation. What kind of techniques do you use to get them to say more, to get them to produce more responses? And what you really have to do is be aware of your own natural probing techniques, see if you can use a variety of probing techniques, and learn to adapt to each individual interviewing situation, because your interviewers will be different, your interviewees will be different, and you need to learn to adapt different probing techniques as you see it suited. So with respondents, you can get two basic types of respondents. So you can get verbal respondents and non-verbal respondents. So verbal respondents are people whom, you basically ask a question and then they go on forever. So I've had, I don't know if I should call it the opportunity, the chance to interview a verbal respondent. So I asked the person one question and the person answered that question for about 45 minutes. And because I was still new with interviewing myself, I did not know how to probe the person to actually stop. So the person went on and gave me like the whole history of something for about 45 minutes. And my battery ran out because it was a recorded interview. It was very hot in the interviewing place. We were all sweating, we all got tired for 45 minutes listening to somebody just talk. And then, so after that, I was hesitant whether I should ask the second question or not. I didn't know what to do. So I was just like, you actually said something that was very interesting. Could you go back to this? So with very verbal respondents, what you tend to get is like off-topic things that you're not interested in. So whenever that happens, you need to learn how to redirect your respondents to some of the things you actually want. So earlier I talked about following the lead of your informants, letting them tell you what is important to them. But if you feel like somebody's going on forever and they are off topic, also learn to put them on the right course so that they produce the kind of information you actually want. You can also have nonverbal respondents, and in that case you also need to learn how to handle those people. So effectively probing them can be very useful. Using open-ended questions, as I already talked about, can also be very useful. So sometimes people may not answer your question, they may not be very verbal about it for a number of reasons. So it might just be like, I don't know, and I frankly don't care. I don't know, and I don't think you care. You want to hear my response, and I don't frankly know. So you always can't tell what is going on. But again, at times you just have to go with a nonverbal response. So just learn how to effectively probe, learn how to ask follow-up questions, learn how to ask the kinds of questions that would allow you to get as much of a response as possible. So even with unstructured interviews, it's important to record the interview. So you could do audio or video recording. And in this class, I would encourage you to video record your interviews because they can serve for multiple purposes. So they will allow you to produce the mini documentary at the end because you will have footage for it. And they will also allow you to record the non-verbal responses of your informants and later go back to the videos and re-examine them to be able to effectively describe what actually went on during the interview. So recording is very important. So don't only rely on your memory. So if you don't record, you may think you will remember everything. Sometimes our memory can fail us, so you don't want that to happen to you. So before you actually show up to the interview place, make sure you test the equipment to make sure it works. So if you have a camera, make sure it works. Make sure you have enough memory space for the length of the interview. That's also important. So make sure you pay attention to battery indicators. That's also important. So save your work at the end. As soon as you're done with the interview, save it somewhere and back it up. So these are really important things. And I know some may say, oh, this is so elementary. But when it happens to you, you go and actually conduct an interview for about an hour and later realize that you have not recorded anything. That's when you will understand that. You have to pay attention to these things. They seem so simple, but they're important. I've even had a case where I was interviewed and The first time, I was very excited about the interview and I talked a lot, and in my opinion, I provided really good answers. It was an exciting interview. So after the person left, about 2 days later, the person emailed me back and told me, "Oh, I'm sorry, but the camera was not recording the whole time you were talking. Can we do it again?" So I really felt like, okay, this was a waste of my time. And the second time we did the interview, it was not as great because I wasn't enthusiastic or excited about it. So sometimes those are the things you lose for not having tested your equipment and making sure they work appropriately, properly. So again, test your equipment to make sure it works. Make sure you have enough memory space, that you didn't run out of memory space. Save your work and back it up. So the last thing I would like to talk about in this lesson is transcribing interviews. So this is the beginning of the data analysis process. So it is very difficult to listen to audio tapes and analyze them directly. That's the reason why we transcribe them, because by transcribing, you learn to pay attention to things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to notice by just listening to the audio tapes or the videotape. So that's the reason why we transcribe. Transcription is very time consuming. So you have to plan about 6 to 8 hours to transcribe 1 hour of recording. It's very time consuming. Now, transcriptions can be simple, where you just transcribe what your respondent said and your own questions in a very simple way. They can also be more detailed. So for your particular studies, I would encourage you to use a detailed transcription. So a transcription that not only accounts for the verbal responses of your respondents, but also for their non-verbal responses. So all the paralinguistic features should be present in your transcription. So things like the produced by your respondents and by you. So the questions you ask, the way you react to your respondent responses should also be part of the transcription. Things like keep clearing throats, intonation change, and shrugging shoulders, body language in general. So things like the person smiled, the person coughed, the person hesitated, the person forcefully said, volume change. All of these kinds of things should be present in your transcription. So I have a transcription template that I will provide you with in class. So this will be on our website. You can download it, and I'll have a model transcription that you can try to follow. So on that model transcription, you'll have one line for transcribing the verbal responses of your respondents and their nonverbal responses, and also your own questions and the way you react to it. So this transcription template would clearly show turn taking and the way the conversation was carried out. So it's a very effective way to bring to life your informant's language. So you have to use that transcription template. It's very useful. So as part of your projects on your assignment sheet, I also ask you to submit a 4-minute transcription of 2 of your interviews. So you have to conduct at least 2 interviews. So that's the minimum number required, 2 interviews. And for each interview, you have to transcribe 4 minutes of each. 4 minutes of each. So not very long. So choose the part of the interviews that you find the most useful and transcribe 4 minutes of it. And in your transcription, as I said again, you have to transcribe not only the verbal responses, but the nonverbal responses. So I do not want to read your interview paper and feel like it's this robotic back and forth between the interviewer and the interviewee. So I want to see more than that. So in your interview papers, describe the setting. For example, where the interview took place. Describe the initial encounter, when you introduce yourself, the way the person reacted to it, and all of that can be very useful. Describe the way the person responded to your questions. Not only the responses themselves, but the way they responded to your questions. So did you ask a question and they smiled and they answered? Did you ask a question and they shrugged their shoulder and they answered? Did you ask a question and their facial expression changed as they were answering the question? Did you ask a question and they cleared their throat, showed signs of hesitation before they answered? Did you ask a question and they remained silent a few moments before they answered the questions? So these are some of the things I want to see in the interview paper, because this will really bring everything to life. So we want to see all these come through, your interview paper. So not only the words of your informants, but also their body language, their demeanors, and how their mannerism, all of these things should appear on the page.